Today I've come here with two hats on. One is Head of Agriculture at Newcastle, and the other is a partner in the Crop Health and Protection Centre. And what I want to do in this short presentation is talk about the way that we need to change the way we carry out the research that underpins much of the basic innovation that we now need in crop protection. I'm going to talk particularly about pesticide resistance and the fact that this is a completely man-made creation, brought about through limited rotation and cultural practice, the high dependence that we have, particularly in this country, on chemical control, the reduction that we've heard about in our previous speakers from the regulatory side about the reduction in actives available, few new modes of action coming through to commercialisation, and finally, probably the breakup of some of the science research systems that used to sit predominantly in the public sector that were out there to try and help prevent some of these problems from arising with respect to resistance. We could talk about pesticide resistance for a great deal of time, but what I really want to do is focus on one particular troubling form which is very topical, and that's the growth of non-target site herbicide resistance in blackgrass. Now that's a particularly worrying type of resistance because this is based on the detoxification of herbicides, potentially even herbicides that are yet to be discovered in terms of their chemistry, and it's completely class agnostic. It's not dependent on the mode of action of the compounds. It was first recorded in blackgrass in the very early 1980s in a field in Essex, and since that time it's now pretty much infested much of our best arable farming land in the UK, probably at least 1.2 million hectares affected one way or another. And last year the cost to winter wheat production was estimated to be about £0.5 billion. So this is a really serious agricultural and even now a financial burden on the UK and particularly on the farming sector. How did it ever come to this is a very good question. And this is, of course, what it looks like. Many of you have probably seen similar scenes in or around your own farms. This is actually a site in North Oxfordshire. This particular field was a dead loss and was combined and put onto an anaerobic digester. So the damage that this can cause to winter wheat production is extremely severe. And one that I think the very visible metaphor of it is you do not need to be a farmer to recognise there's something very badly wrong with our land when it's full of black grass. So what has the public sector been doing with respect to the growth of pesticide resistance and the many other issues that face us in the crop protection sector? Well, one of the things that was brought about in 2014 was a report that was commissioned by the Government Office of Science as a kind of roadmap for next steps in terms of developing a coordinated strategy for crop protection and crop health for the next couple of decades. And there are a number of recommendations in that report which I don't need to read to you today, but the one I'm going to talk about in particular is this idea of fast-tracking innovation and better understanding of the basic science that underpins the way in which we tackle some of these problems, pests and pathogens. Effectively learning from the way the medical sector deals with exactly the same growing problems that it faces and applying those same strategies in the crop protection sector. One of the things that we are challenged with as scientists working in agriculture in the UK is the fragmented landscape that we work in. I personally work in a university, but I'm also now a member of an institute and also a crop protection centre. So we have to work together to join these pieces to take forward technology that's discovered at the bench from basic science and take that all the way through to final translation. So the next 2 or 3 slides, I just want to talk about the way in which we're changing the way that we're working to adapt better to the needs of the industry. So first of all, with respect to the research that we carry out at universities, historically much work has been carried out in crop protection and in agriculture generally by lone PIs, lone academics working with their small groups. That's now a way of working that we're moving away from. We're working in larger groupings, we're working in multidisciplinary groups, and importantly we're tying our basic science together with the needs of the farming sector through translation. So this isn't work that's done for 4 years and then we try and find someone interested in listening to what we've done. We're actually carrying out this work on a day-by-day basis with the farmers. Secondly, universities are now working differently with the industries that they face. So, for example, in the case of Newcastle University, we formed a joint institute with a private sector organisation, Ferroscience Limited, so that we can take forward the innovation from a university and interface it directly with a company to the end user needs. And finally, there's a new boy on the block with respect to tying together much of what we had back in the 70s and 80s in terms of all of the different assets and capabilities that we would have had in crop protection and putting them back together under one roof. So this is a very major innovation. It's one we've got a trailer here demonstrating some of the work of the Centre for Crop Health and Protection. And I think this is one of the most positive steps that's come out of that recommendation set for the Government Officer's Science Report. In particular, what we have here today is a facility that enables us to take research from the laboratory out into the field. It allows us to translate the developments coming out of the latest technologies, people, for example, moving into the sector in terms of agri-technology, so they can move from where they are at the moment to working on direct agricultural problems. So it's important we have this interface between the lab and the field. And in particular, what we've been working on in the last few months are new technologies for diagnostics to determine different mechanisms of herbicide resistance and turn those into workable, tractable tools for the farming sector. So we've been involved through the Blackgrass Resistance Initiative in a scientific audit of different populations of blackgrass, assessing them not just in where they're located, but the types of resistance that we see in those different populations, the realization that they are not all the same. They are independently evolving, and that means that they have independent strengths and weaknesses with respect to control. If we can understand those, then perhaps we can put the genie back into the bottle. Importantly, our own group at Newcastle are interested in this idea of understanding the molecular basis of non-target site resistance, teasing apart the genetic material of the plants, the proteins and the metabolites, to work out what mechanisms of resistance these plants have evolved in order to overcome all of our latest graminicides. In particular, coming out of that technology, we've been able to evolve a first-generation diagnostic that will give us quantitative data about types of non-target site resistance in blackgrass that give us a readout within 20 minutes, there and then in the field. So these are not, the plants don't need to be taken away and tested. This will give us a direct output in terms of the non-target site resistant mechanism present in these plants. We're currently working with Frontier Agriculture to see how that information can be used usefully out in the field in this growing season. And importantly, learning again from the medical sector, if they have resistance to one of their drugs, they don't abandon the drug, they bust the resistance mechanism. And that's something else that we've become very interested in, unraveling chinks in the armor of resistance in blackgrass, so that we can then adapt drugs to knock out those regulatory mechanisms and restore control. And that's exactly what we've been able to do in this case, take a drug, a chemical that was originally tested as a drug to bust multiple drug resistance in humans, and found that it actually has an effect on busting herbicide resistance in blackgrass. So finally, if there's a message to be made here, it's around the fragmented nature of the research that we carry out to underpin crop protection here in the UK, but the fact there is now really a ground change in the way that we now want to work with the sector and indeed translate our science from the basic all the way through to the end product. Thank you.